Yeah, so I don't know that arousal necessarily is, but I would certainly say that reactivity to novelty.
That's what I was thinking. Emotional reactivity.
Yeah, emotional reactivity to novelty is, in fact, probably an underlying basic biological process that reflects the origins of behavioral innovation. And how you get from that initial disposition to respond negatively or aversively to novelty to behavioral inhibition is an interesting question in of itself, and then from there on to anxiety. But I think that's sort of the basic biology. You have to unpack the construct. That's where I would start.
Then that, you're right, I guess your comment then makes me think about it, is to get from the basic sort of arousal to inhibition, does that involve some of the other sorts of mechanisms that we might be thinking about, parent interaction or environmental type components, for example? Or putting it differently, do all kids who are emotionally reactive, are they all going to end up becoming inhibited? Right? Probably not.
Right. So let me pose a counter question, which is a question in the behavioral inhibition literature. So both Mary Kagan's and our own and other people's assessment in 1 and 2-year-olds of behavioral inhibition includes response to social novelty, usually an unfamiliar adult, but also includes responses to non-social novel stimuli. Now, granted that within a social context, but there's still responses to, robots and clowns and tunnels and vacuum cleaners and all sorts of things like that, right? If you follow the trajectories of behaviorally inhibited children, they are generally no longer frightened or avoidant of non-social novelty after a while. And that it becomes more focused on the social social novelties. Unfamiliar peers, for example, become a prominent catalyst for social withdrawal. So what happens to the response to social, non-social novelty?
Well, I guess I've always thought that the way that behavioural inhibition is defined and measured focuses more on the social. So I was wondering, is it that there are some kids who continue to be responsive to the non-social, but they're not picked up as behaviour inhibited with that assessment, with that later assessment?
Well, the answer is both yes and no, right? So it depends upon the age in which you assess behavioral inhibition. Probably the questionnaires, like behavioral inhibition questionnaires, focus on social novelty. But the early assessments of behavioral inhibition are not solely assessments of social.
It's solely, but they're pretty both that way. Well, particularly as they get older.
As they get older, yeah, that's saying at very young ages.
No, that's something that I wonder about, because when Jerry Kagan did these and showed us how to do them, it's just at a certain age you don't use the non-social stimuli anymore. I assume that's because it wasn't something that, and that's why he did that, but so I don't know what would happen if he tried to put 7-year-olds or 6-year-olds in the room with novel things. But on the other hand, we also haven't ever looked, I don't know if you've ever taken it apart, if you just get inhibition to non-social novelty and see if that predicts anything versus everything else.
There's actually a paper that Ken Rubin published, I believe it was in Child Development, in which he did exactly that. He took apart the social and non-social novelty, and much like your intuition, it was the kids who responded to social novelty who continued on to show behavioral inhibition, and those that responded to non-social novelty did not.
So the question is, the kids who respond to non-social novelty, do they just habituate and sort of disappears?
Or
Or do they have other sorts of issues?
Right.
If we had a different task at age 7, would they show up at high on that sort of task? Would they have specific areas for that, or physically oriented?
I actually think that the reason that we focus, Jerry focuses, and that we all focus on social novelties is because it's so salient, and because in many instances it's also very impairing and distressful for the child and as they get older, for the adolescent. But I think that the response to uncertainty and novelty, even in the non-social situation, continues amongst these individuals. So that while it may not be impairing or an obviously salient or distressing, it continues to be a theme within their lives. Perhaps in terms of their risk-taking, perhaps in terms of their avoiding versus interacting in certain novel situations, and I think social. But
Maybe it's also an issue because it's easier to avoid those non-social.
yeah.
As we get older.
Yeah.
It's less out of them. Other than where you can't control them, so it comes to you.
It's also easier to have good experiences with them that would make you no longer fear them, whereas it's much more complex to know that you're going to have good reactions from fears.
I guess and maybe this is reflecting the perspective issues I'm thinking. I'm now thinking with my clinician hat on, particularly as an adult clinician, thinking about the different types of anxiety problems. And I'm thinking something like panic disorder, agoraphobia, which is a far more physically based problem, where the perceived dangers and threats are about hyperhidrotic internal physical problems. And now that's highly impairing when you get to that age. It's not seen as not impairing at a young age. And I'm just wondering then, I can't think off the top of my head of particular studies, but presumably BI is less as well. The studies are like the Roosevelt's Gilbert's study, where presumably BI is less of a predictor for panic disorder than for social phobia. And it may be because of the way we're focusing on BI. And I'm wondering if maybe those kids who are responsive to non-social sorts of threats, otherwise who perhaps are more at risk for those more physical type problems down the track, physically oriented threat problems down the track.
Would there also be other completely different temperamental issues like negative affectivity or neuroticism or something that isn't BI that maybe a little overlaps with it, but that's in itself a risk factor for those kinds of anxiety? And even anxiety sensitivity, I don't think of that as temperament, but it's some kind of condition.
Well,
like if you're asking if there's an early temperamental pre-.
Well, no, anxiety sensitivity is a good example. I would think that very much the personality style, the temperament, yeah, definitely.
Right.
Is it very physically oriented?
Yes, but you could still
Now,
ask
where does that
if
come
there's
from
something younger,
Yes.
like maybe there's something that nobody's studying yet, that's sensitivity to internal sensations that you can't study in how you measure it, but that may lead to anxiety.